Hi there. Tomorrow, Tuesday, January 9th, Netflix is going to have a press panel at the Consumer Electronics Show for the upcoming adaptation of the Chinese sci-fi novel series Three Body Problem, with showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss at the panel. This is their first big public appearance since late 2019 in the aftermath of Game of Thrones Season 8, and indeed their last public appearance at all for the press since the disastrous Austin Film Fest panel in late October 2019. So, tomorrow, this press panel will mark the return of the Benioff and Weiss show. I'm not referring to Three Body Problem. I'm referring to the meta-level show that HBO put on for them as the propaganda promotion surrounding Game of Thrones, the media blitz, that they would run puff pieces in magazines and on late-night talk shows, hyping up these guys are geniuses. And when you saw Season 8, and it was so shocking how stupid they are that Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. They were always like that. If you went through the less circulated interviews, or they're acting like complete morons, like Oxford Union was a big one that's still on YouTube from right before Season 5. And the DVD commentaries where they're like openly drunk and crass and saying stupid mistakes they made. Like, if you looked closely enough, this is just they papered over. These guys are, polished a turd, that all of it was a marketing campaign. And in many ways, it's not just them, it's celebrity culture. It reminds me of how on Amazon that they really demonstrated on Amazon's The Boys, how Vought has this PR campaign to present Homelander as this really great person, and he doesn't even write his own Twitter feed. He has a team of PR guys to do that. So I'm saying is the meta-level show of the media blitz of a corporation, now Netflix instead of HBO, is going to restart, and it's going to get weird. No other predictions other than it's going to get pretty weird and infuriating. Well, as I thought this was, obviously going to happen, they need to get their money's worth out of this guy. I'm warning you all, if you thought this wasn't going to happen, it will. That you will see Netflix desperately trying to polish up what happened and present these guys as this is a show from the geniuses that made Game of Thrones. And while we haven't had that media blitz up to now because of the writer's strikes delayed the premiere, this panel marks the official start of public promotion for Netflix's Three Body Problem, which cost $200 million just for the contract with Benioff and Weiss, and which they think will be their new big flagship show on the scale of somewhere between Stranger Things and The Crown. This is supposed to be a major thing. They bet the farm on this after canceling a lot of other shows. So the Benioff and Weiss show is going to start tomorrow. And maybe not, I don't know if they're going to put out video clips of this. It will be reported on, in the news. It's a press conference, not a public one, but the marketing campaign will ramp up for this. You will start seeing puff pieces on these guys. They will make the late night variety things, and you wonder how could they make public appearances again. Remember after Season 5 when we were stunned that after things like the Sansa rape and TV during Season 5 was a terrible season, they just went through the motions again, and no one would talk about the elephant in the room. Because the access journalism system is set up. So I'm making this video to warn you guys about that, and also some general warnings for, if anyone's new here from Three Body Problem fandom, what you can expect. That these are things I wish someone had told us to expect when Game of Thrones began, that we kept thinking they have a different interpretation of this than we do, and they're rewriting it to show off actors or to pander for awards to further their own careers. That they didn't care about Game of Thrones or even about HBO. They jumped ship that we want to launch a movie career. So there's a specific pattern of things they did that you can tell, and just I wish someone would give me a heads up that I wasted so much time trying to parse out why is Daenerys doing this when they want her to win it. They want Emilia to win an Emmy Award. And in many cases, the actors were arguing with them, don't do this. This doesn't make sense. for my character, and they'd overrule them. They cared about no one but themselves as careerists, and they're also deeply incompetent. And just that this has come up over social media the past few days, that I'm seeing both ends of the spectrum, from people who insist they can't be back, when, guys, this isn't, they haven't been promoting it, but this has been in the news for like 2 years. They're making Three Body Problem. The fact that you didn't hear about it doesn't mean you can put your head in the sand and say it isn't happening, that they aren't facing real consequences for what happened to Game of Thrones. They just went on to another $200 million TV contract. And at the other end of the spectrum are the people who insist, no, it wasn't there's still people saying it wasn't their fault, they'll do well on Three Body Problem. They won't, and I just want to address all that. And I'm doing this audio only as a long-form podcast. Obviously, you clicked on this, you can see it's long-form. I have about 7 scripted pages here to go through. Easier this way, just put it on in the background and listen to it. That's why I'm doing it audio, because I know it's long. But where do we start with this? I'm trying to do this in one take. That the last time they made a public appearance was Austin Film Fest panel. If you haven't heard of that, I'm the only channel that still has clips of it, that there's someone illicitly made audio recordings of the full panel, and I had to fight a copyright strike to keep those up, so those are going to be linked in the description of the point the controversial points happened. Of course, when they put out the video of that, they cynically edited it long after there was a live tweet. Live tweeter infamously reported all the worst things they said, and it went viral, and every news outlet was reporting on it. And this was a month after the final Emmy Awards, which were September, so October 2019. They said spent a full hour at a writers' conference bragging about how incompetent they were, but managed to fail upward. And while that gets laughs at like a Comic-Con, they didn't understand this is a writers' conference. The people you are bragging to are career screenwriters who you screwed over. The point where he's explicitly saying, HBO was pressuring us to hire other writers and we refused because despite having no experience, we wanted to dominate it ourselves. Like, the people you're talking to in the audience are those screenwriters. And they bragged about it, and then the people in charge were giving them an honorary award for Game of Thrones after season 8. Not even realizing how, and I blame the people who ran that just as much. You didn't vet them. You didn't understand. We're praising them to latch on to their hype. And then he says all these stupid things. They said those things in other prior interviews and panels before. It's just now people were paying attention when he's bragging about how incompetent he is. You may have seen more widespread than this. The last big talk show interview they did was Jimmy Kimmel during the middle of season 8. It was after the Night King died, but before the finale. And the point where they do their routine, where they brag, they're trying to be relatable by bragging about how I'm an average Joe. No, you're not. You're some guy who cheated the system. Doesn't mean you are not vicariously me winning. They try to act like I'm one of you slobs. I faked it in. No, you cheated me out of a well-made TV show by a professional. But they did that in the Jimmy Kimmel clip where they're bragging about how incompetent they were. And Jimmy, you see him starting to realize this isn't funny, and they had foolish faith in you guys. This isn't, I'm not laughing. But more so than that, that was on, a big broadcast late night show. This was Austin Film Fest. They just went and hid, but that doesn't mean they're not going to come back. Bad actors like that, like whenever there's producers who make a flop or something, they just come back in a few years. And the whole thing is, 2 days after this, Disney used the backlash to the panel as an excuse to publicly announce what was already probably decided behind the scenes, that they were dropped from making Star Wars movies. That was our one victory, that they rushed Game of Thrones self-consciously, and they verbalized aloud to other people, as we found out in interviews, we are rushing the ending to start our movie careers. This is in print. It's in that Tinderbox book. And it was also in James Hibbard's book. He's one of their mouthpieces. That they told him, and why are you telling us this? We wouldn't have found this out unless you told us. That during season 3, Benioff aloud in words told Hibbard, I have no intention of staying a full 10 seasons to fully adapt the books. After it's a hit, after the Red Wedding and stuff, after season 3, which because of the writing delay only will start affecting the season after that, so no surprise season 5 is when it turned bad. He told Hibbert, and this is a print interview, during season 3 filming, he said, I only intend to stay through season 6 when I have more, quote, leverage, when it's too late to stop me. And then spring on HBO that I want to do only 7 seasons, and the 7th season isn't on TV, it's a pair of movies, to segue into launching my movie career. And this is in print, it's in the Tinderbox book. Websites have reported on this, I've reported on it, and it's HBO's head is just gaping at them that this was, you've been planning to betray us the whole time. Like, on a scale of years, for at least the last 3 years, aloud, in private, to Hibbert and people, I'm not going to stay for 10 seasons, I'm not going to hand it off, I intend to rush it with 6 seasons, then a pair of movies. It's not that it needs movies, it's to launch my movie career. And that's why season 8 is sort of like 2 halves. Like the White Walker 3 episodes, then the Danny 3 episodes, that those were supposed to be movies, and they hastily reworked them into TV, and it's like, no, that's your fault. They would blame, HBO wouldn't make the movies. HBO never does movies like that, where you have to see the finale, well, maybe a tie-in movie, but you have to see the finale as a movie instead of with, they said it would be a betrayal of our cable subscribers. And it's, Benioff, this wasn't a masterstroke of betrayal, they told him, you idiot, not only are you betraying us, we physically can't do that the subscribers would turn on us. That is insane. And if you had told me this 3 years ago, that's one thing. You waited so late by waiting until it's too late to turn around. No, I can't suddenly go and make a movie. All you did was waste time you could have spent at least planning it out as a TV season, which is what made it even more rushed. That you really thought you could strong-arm them into making a movie to launch your movie career. It's all in print. HBO physically couldn't do that. All of this came to light. They jumped ship to Star Wars. I want to be it's not about money, it's the prestige. I want to be a Star Wars movie producer. Behind the scenes, we never heard a word of what happened. But Star Wars must have realized they're idiots. And I'm still fascinated. They never talk about their internal stuff that much. Disney is big enough that they are willing to fire writers or directors and cancel projects. That for once, big fish, tiny pond, they work their way up the food chain so much that they hit a point where they hit people who are willing to say no to them. That, yeah, we're willing to take the loss. You aren't worth the investment we put in you. We're willing to just say we lost a year's worth of work. Your work is insane. You're an idiot. We don't want to work with you. Which came as a shock to everyone. Even this they played off as not a problem. They went, oh, well, we really wanted to do Netflix stuff more. That you could, at the time I covered all this, that they were shopping around to one of the other streamers who might want to work with them. So at this point, they've alienated Warner Discovery they alienated HBO. They've alienated Disney. They moved on to Netflix. There's only like 6 big streamers left. Who else would work with them at this point? You wonder, as they cycle through. And Benioff is not a young man. He is 54 now, and he wasted 5 years since Game of Thrones. What is he going to do now? In case someone in the comments brings up that he suggested that Confederate show, that is blatantly a Bialystok and Bloom production. That he suggested a fake bad show, offensively bad, to get out of the contract. Because in the interviews it says, since season 3, behind the scenes, he was planning to rush the show to launch a movie career, right? Well, that means he had no intention of making another TV show of any kind. So then when we hear he's pitching this bizarre-sounding Confederate show, which not only is, and it sounds like a rip-off of other alternate history stuff done poorly, he intentionally thought of an offensive TV show idea to get out of his future contract with HBO so they couldn't keep him for more projects. The Bialystok and Bloom situation. And that they really thought they could control him, and this happens with other showrunners of, well, we can control them. What if they just suggest bad ideas to get out of your contract? There is no counter to that. So you shouldn't be giving celebrity showrunners absolute power like that. But it's just, we know you were planning to do a movie career because interviews came out. Since that time, that they no, we're going to Netflix, they signed a 5-year development deal for $200 million, not for one show, but to make, the promise is it's one of those big multi-show development deals. And they're already in too deep on it. I mean, you have like the Mike Flanagan, Shonda Rhimes of the world are core producers on a family of shows that they delegate to other showrunners, like 4 or 5 of them, and I've gone over these numbers, that they shouldn't even have cranked out one big show for $200 million. Even another, I don't know, Game of Thrones, but Witcher scale, Stranger Things might be a bit large, but they should have been producing like 3 Witcher scale shows for that price tag. And instead, they haven't produced anything really, except, oh, we got Three Body Problem. Now, Three Body Problem is the big thing they're working on, and they are hyping it up as the thing that will justify these $200 million you spent on us. And again, their 5-year contract is almost out, and yes, there was a pandemic which slowed things down. But they are heavily invested in this as this is our comeback. You might have seen 1 or 2 other things they dashed off, like movie script here, a forgettable minor Netflix thing somewhere else. Everyone's openly saying that they haven't really done anything since Game of Thrones ended 4 years ago. And suddenly they're back, and people wanted to forget they weren't around, despite all the Cassandras out there like me saying they didn't go away forever. They're just laying low for a bit. And I worry about that with people, and with all this talk about, toxic industry culture and stuff, that people just lay low for a bit, then come back. The thing that is that the fate of mankind, to just forget. It reminds me of that thing in the original Red Dawn, where there really is only one Red Dawn movie, where he goes like, why are the US and Russia and the Soviets at war? And the soldier says, well, the 2 biggest kids on the block, I guess they'll eventually just fight, it doesn't matter who started it. And he goes, maybe we just forgot how bad war was. That when you see history going through cycles like that when there's a long period of peace, suddenly, eventually after war passes from living memory, there's a big surge in military jingoism by people who forgot just how bad war is. Or people who say, I'm not going to get vaccines for my kids because a large percentage of children dying from measles every year has passed beyond living memory, even though, historians and scientists are telling them war is bad, you need vaccines, or prepare for the future, there might be an economic collapse, you need to save your money. It's just, did people forget that times can get bad, and that bad things happen, and that you need to be worried about the future? I don't know, but it's a widespread pattern we've seen, sorry I'm getting into this, with major producers who have huge blunders, not even mentioning private sex scandals, where they do not get canceled. They lay low for a few years, then come back as if nothing had happened as soon as they think the news cycle has gotten bored with their scandal. And the unfortunate thing is, more often than not, it works. Really, I'm facing all of this, like I said in the beginning, from 2 sides. My whole point is that Benioff and Weiss are incompetent con men. They keep failing upwards. That there's 2 points to this. First, well, due to the corrupt industry and negligence of the hype news media who aren't real journalists, these incompetent guys will keep failing upwards. And some disagree with the first part, that they're incompetent, and some disagree with the second part, that they will continue to fail upwards unless something else is done. Both are wrong. Without real active, responsible journalism calling them out on this, they will keep returning. Joss Whedon is going to come back eventually, or try to make a comeback. And he failed pretty hard, so I don't think, he's an exception, he might not succeed, but he's laying low, he'll try to do something. He doesn't accept this. Things were bad from Season 5 onward in Game of Thrones, not just Season 8, but after Season 8, with no fake promise that next season will make up for it, there was this massive backlash against Benioff and Weiss. The weird part, though, is fighting, it's no one person circulating this. Crowd mentality and becoming a meme that becomes self-reinforcing. Not journalism or appraisement, not even propaganda as such, no one is circulating it. Just what Stephen Colbert calls truthiness, which I think is becoming more prevalent due to our social media algorithm-driven world or something, that everyone goes down their own rabbit hole and believes what they want to believe. Truthiness is believing what you want to be true, rather than the bad news that it could get worse. Applies to both ends of the spectrum. Incompetent con men who keep failing upwards. Most people hate them now, so most of this is about the people saying how could they keep failing upwards. And what they want to believe is that their careers are over. When I've been, people went, why are you still talking about Benioff and Weiss in early 2023? Well, there's this really big $200 million three-body problem show they're working on, which Netflix intends to be their next Stranger Things flagship. They didn't go away. It's just not in the news cycle now. Again, the Cassandra thing, but they just moved over to Netflix. They have this huge show. From everything we've seen of them, they have no idea how to run a TV show. They are utterly unqualified to run one. Everything they said at Austin Film Fest, you remember that. But the weirdest thing is that I've seen on just through social media, through YouTube comments, large number of people who weren't keeping up with the news keep insisting to me, because there was no advertisement for Three Body Problem, well, they can't be in charge of this because they deserve to be canceled. Therefore, they're not. I'm saying, well, it's a reality and it's coming next year. This isn't a theory. I mean, the physical reality of... It's weird when you get Twitter comments where people say they can't be in charge of this. They are. I'm not theorizing this. This isn't even a proposed project. There's teaser trailers already. Because we don't have what they say is an informed electorate, that the news media, the Access journalism has done such a bad job of this. They weren't even reporting on Three Body Problem up until trailers came out. And even now, they're just starting to grapple with it. There was no preparation. You had years to... They were coming. That when I see people in comments, individual people, no one thinks driving it, they react with disbelief when I or others report that they're in charge of this new flagship show at Netflix. And then what do? Do you just feel bad and not know what to think and feel powerless? Or do you try to get news to report on it? The premiere is set for March 21st. And they haven't been promoting it a lot. The media blitz will start tomorrow, January 9th. Only 3 months before it, they had one short teaser, which was not that widely circulated at their Netflix To Dumb event last fall, but maybe not the biggest sign that Netflix is confident in this project, that they weren't promoting it a full year in advance. When they were filming it, maybe not, but I get the feeling the media blitz is about to begin. So part of the people weren't reporting is that lack of advertising is a factor, but the pure disbelief of this isn't happening. And I saw that in late Game of Thrones. Rather than react with we need to start making news articles condemning this, finding out what were the systemic industry problems that led to the cronyism of incompetent people being hired, they just sit there stunned going, this isn't happening. This isn't happening. That largely happened with the book fandom after Season 5. And we had come to grips with it by Season 7 and 8. We were just laughing at, we could tell how incompetent they were, and now it's obvious to everyone. But the weird thing is, for people who genuinely went into Season 8 expecting the best season ever, I can only imagine their mental shock, indeed their trauma, that they are traumatized into inaction. Learned helplessness. Because I was shocked enough, Season 5, that they were 8 seasons into this before they realized they'd been duped for so long and had invested so much into it. That just, I can't believe it. I imagine them hugging their arms around themselves and closing in and shaking, this isn't happening, this isn't happening. That disgusts me more than even people in favor that you're shocked into inaction is amazing. And I know it's hard. I know when the Joss Whedon thing happened, that so many people believed in that guy that it was genuinely upsetting. I wasn't even a big Joss Whedon fan. It was genuinely upsetting when, then the Buffy cast came forward and said all this stuff he'd been doing for 20 years. That our image of that guy, who was a beloved figure, it was upsetting. I admit that. The big thing, all of this, I'm basing it on, a lot of it, and I encourage you to read this, is there was this really great book that came out this summer. I just finished reading it over Christmas break, by veteran TV reporter Maureen Ryan. She's covered a lot of high-profile news on high-profile TV shows for the past decade. She's a major name in the TV journalism industry. And she put out this book by Maureen Ryan, Burn It Down, which was, she'd been working on it for a while, but it tied in with it. The writer's strike came this summer, but that's not really by any accident. People forecasted there was probably going to be a writer's strike a year before it happened, but tying in with that, and it talks about all of the problems in the industry in this current era since the last strike in 2008, and the internal corruption, the complete incompetence. She doesn't talk about Game of Thrones at all. These were system-wide problems. The system was broken. That one of the things she talked about among several is, and not Game of Thrones, without mentioning names, people pointing out a widespread problem was that TV corporations would hire figurehead showrunners who keep failing upwards because they're a brand name that we paid for. And we have to keep giving them shows because we already paid for them. We already built them up as a name. When they're not even running the show, but they still have absolute power. And how and everything went wider in that, and that was the corruption part. How people then have like private scandals, like sex scandals, keep coming back. Like she mentions, like Louis C.K. by name. He didn't go away. He has a successful comedy tour now. He just took a few years off. Or that Scott Rudin guy, who's a major publisher. That wasn't even a sex scandal. It's just toxic workplace, borderline physical assault situations. And she says in the book, no one expects Scott Rudin to go away forever. He's just laying low for a couple of years. And you see them come back. They just go on break for a bit. Yes, they come back without eternal vigilance. So if you're the part of this equation that says, I don't believe with the first half that with the second half, that they keep failing upwards, and even when they fail, they'll take a year off, take 2 years off, then come back with another studio who wants to get their money's worth out of hiring them. It happens all the time with other people. They're not special. They're part of a flawed system. The thing I keep thinking of is HBO's Chernobyl show was such a great example of that. And it happens in corporate culture. It happens everywhere. That whole idea, and I have this in my sarcastic front page video when I loaded up the Season 8 documentary. I intercut it with the Chernobyl stuff because it had just come out right after Season 8. Of the whole point of that movie miniseries is it wasn't just the fault of this one plant manager. The entire system cut corners everywhere and believes their own lies, that everything is perfect. And that fundamentally the emergency stop should have worked, no matter what the incompetent plant manager did, because, well, fundamentally we all knew that the safety emergency shutoff would actually make it explode. We just didn't want to, well, why worry about an emergency stop that we'll never need, because no one will ever do that. That the entire system was actively promoting people like that who are willing to toe the party line rather than competent people. And if you make a mistake, a lot of the plant runners on that, they just cycled back into running other nuclear plants. You don't get punished because it'd be an acknowledgement of failure on the part of the people who hired you. So they can come back, they just go on pause for a bit. It is a failure of public journalism. It exposes that they need major news outlets to keep the pressure on them. You need real professional journalism. Instead, we've got hype news and clickbaiters, many owned by the media outlets themselves. That is, if you had a construction company who also hires their own fire code inspectors. The definition of conflict of interest. But what really shocks me is the other news reporters who were not specifically working for companies owned by HBO, like Entertainment Weekly. We later realized they're getting so many exclusives, which give exclusive interviews to put a positive spin on things, because their parent company is owned by them. What shook me more, is companies that were not owned by HBO, but still wanted what's called access journalism, that the only way we're going to get an interview ever, or potentially get one, is if we don't rock the boat. That positively reporting on hyped shows is a lot bigger business in terms of clicks and viewership on the websites than responsibly pointing out industry corruption. So that's the second half. They're incompetent frauds who keep failing upwards. Nothing changed. They're still failing upwards. They weren't called out. They were not called out for what they did after season 8. They did not face repercussions any more than they did after season 5. But that brings us around to the first half, which is not as common but arguably more jarring. There are still people defending Benioff and Weiss. I run into them all the time. They're in the Twitter comment sections of when there's announcements for Three Body Problem, particularly, but I see them everywhere and no one person is directing it. They're making excuses and mental compartmentalization to rationalize that maybe their Three Body Problem adaptation will be good. And that's what effective con men do. It isn't based on intellectual argument. You want to believe them. Once you get through emotional manipulation or sunk cost fallacy people up to a point where they want to believe you, they'll believe anything you say, no matter how ridiculous. We wanted a good Game of Thrones adaptation, so I was in denial. We were all in denial season by season, most of us at least, as they made increasingly bizarre choices. Even after season 5, I was like, what the hell is going on? Maybe there's something... I was confused as much as any rational person. It was only after season 6 that when I look at more evidence in the Blu-ray commentaries that I really got the picture of what's going on. But even like news sites, book news sites, are like, let's see where they're going with this, because they were in shock. And what could this even be? Because we were waiting for the real journalists to cover it, and they didn't. But they make you want to believe them. We wanted a good Game of Thrones adaptation, and it's the eerie parallels if I see the same thing, that just as by season 4 we were making rationalizations and compartmentalization and excuses of, well, they messed up the Rob Talissa storyline is weird, but the other ones are fine. That's compartmentalization. They were fundamentally the same problems. They went on to other things. Now, Three Body Problem fans want a good adaptation, so they're rationalizing and compartmentalizing again. I run into this on Twitter all the time. And the groupthink meme that has developed among them, all independently, no one person is driving it, is this meme going around that Game of Thrones only got bad once they ran out of books. Therefore, it isn't their fault, and Three Body Problem will be great because it's a finished series. This would fall apart under 2 minutes if it were a live face-to-face conversation at like a convention panel. What the hell was Season 5 onwards to you? Season 5, the Sansa rape, TV Dorne butchering Stannis, the whole reason those were controversies in 2015 is because they abandoned what the books did. Were you even aware of this? There were articles in the New York Times about it saying they burned through the 4th and 5th books in a single TV season during Season 5, making wacky changes and stuff, as we later realized because they were simply rushing to get done because they wanted to go to and do movies. And people are so stunned they never went back and said, you know, in retrospect I defended Season 5 at the time, but looking back on it they wanted to leave to do movies, and this is the same reason Season 8 is bad. I should have called them on it earlier. But no, well, they compartmentalize. That's just Sansa, and that's Dorne. But the Jon Snow stuff is still good. You have no guarantee they're not going to ruin the Jon Snow stuff next season, or that Arya will have this silly chase thing that really isn't a good storyline in Season 6. The denial that it couldn't happen to me, I'm going to focus on the good. And that's why the real point where the viewership dropped off wasn't when, obviously the Daenerys burning King's Landing was a gut punch because she wouldn't do that, but when Arya kills the Night King, because people had compartmentalized so much on they're sacrificing other storylines to focus on the White Walker storyline. When they brushed all of that aside in a single episode, and it might have even been a little better if it was Jon Snow killing him, and people would have still complained, what, that's it? It's one episode. On top of that, they threw out all of this setup, which the books have done and will do. The books will have Jon be important. That nothing was sacred to them, and they kept rationalizing it's all for the White Walker storyline. We can drop Dorne, Stannis, Sansa, even Arya. They're not important. It's about the White Walker storyline. And then when that thing got thrown away in episode 3, all the lies fell away. Point is, there were articles in the Times and stuff of the whole reason it was a controversy is because this isn't what the books did. And then as soon as season 6, it just became this reinforcing meme of, oh, well, they advanced beyond the books. They weren't listening. They didn't want to listen. They are in denial. And it would be frightening to see this conversation play out in real life, like at a convention panel in person, going, what was season 5 to you? They ran out of books. You really think season 8 was the problem? Or season 7? No one really defends season 7 either, but season 6 is when it's 5 through 8, and they defend 6 because, wow, the spectacle of the Battle of the Bastards, even though from a story standpoint it was gibberish. These weren't good seasons. The Battle of the Bastards is the point I finally turned on the show, as the last straw of the North didn't remember. None of the vassals turn on the Boltons. Sansa played no major role in this. In terms of Littlefinger manipulating her, you honestly thought this was her being proactive. And it exists to show off Kit Harington for awards. That's when I started looking at the DVD commentaries and realized what they're really doing. But all of our arguments that this isn't even what the books did long before they ran out of books falls on deaf ears, and when you're online, you can just close out arguments that you don't want to hear, like on Twitter. That they are in denial, and they can go make you go away and ignore physical reality. It's weird, 1 or 2 times I've seen a critic, challenged on, well, why did the Sansa rape happen? That wasn't in the books, her storyline is in the Vale, and they just literally blank face. Blank facing is when you have like that look you have like the gears are turning, but you cannot think of anything to say. Like that confused dog look, like they were about to get a treat and then you smack them on the nose and they just look utterly confused. That's an expression I've heard, but I'm not a dog person, but that confused, does not compute look of the mental blank facing when someone who's in a cult basically gets challenged on a basic contradiction. Or even if they acknowledge that, well, it was good up to the point, I've actually seen people compartmentalize and retrench by arguing, well, it was good up to the point that they voluntarily abandoned the source material. Maybe they learned their lesson. That's a real argument I've heard. Well, it was good so long as they were intentionally following it, so maybe they learned not to voluntarily abandon the source material to launch a movie career mid-run. What guarantee do you have that they have learned this so-called lesson? After season 8, they couldn't latch on to every year, I saw that every year even. After season 5, well, they learned their lesson. After season 2 with Talissa, well, they learned their lesson. After season 8, after the White Walker thing, I would taunt people like that, going, oh, I suppose, people who had said this to me before, oh, I suppose they learned their lesson for the next 3 episodes already filmed. And now it's being resurrected for Three Body Problem. Oh, they learned their lesson. Oh, it's because they surpassed the source material. They didn't. What does that even mean? They learned their lesson. And it wasn't just voluntarily abandoning the source material season 5 onwards. Even seasons 1 to 4, which were relatively good, I mean, for a TV show, we knew there would be, simplifications for adaptation. We increasingly heard evidence that back in seasons 1 to 4, they were just figureheads. And if you doubt that, look at the failure of the unaired pilot. Every mistake they made in that was repeated in the later seasons, specifically as a pattern. And what stands to reason is that HBO was covering for them as figureheads seasons 1 to 4 onwards, and that eventually they got so prideful that they stopped listening to those advisors who were just there to help them, and no, I'm going to do it my way. That they couldn't understand that there's people who, out of ego, will refuse help from career experts. Like the Firefest thing, that when career experts tell you, no, you're not supposed to do it that way, how dare you tell me that? And again, much of this, Maureen Ryan's recent book about Burn It Down, about the corrupt behind-the-scenes mentality, turns out this was a widespread thing in the 2010s. This was a widespread problem. The TV studios were hiring unqualified but high-profile showrunners to basically be the face of the show. The hotshot mascots that they sent around the talk show circuit, when the actual work of running the show was left to other people. And that might have worked, functionally on our end, at least on the receiving end. Okay, he's a figurehead, but someone else is really in charge. The problem, as Maureen Ryan specifically put, I'm going to make a video about Maureen Ryan's book, it's amazing. Ryan explained in interviews with a lot of industry people that the crux of the problem is they'd appoint these figurehead showrunners that they knew were not qualified, and other people, the line directors will really be handling the day-to-day stuff or the writing staff, and then turn around and give the figurehead showrunners total creative control, which defeats the purpose of them being a, quote, figurehead if they have absolute power. So they just plain wouldn't listen to their own advisors, and it reminds me disturbingly similar to Game of Thrones, which is straight from the book in Season 1. A big criticism Martin has of this whole thing, of systems like that, is how a king with absolute power can be a figurehead, and the hand of the king and small counts are the ones really running the realm, but ultimately the king has absolute power and can choose to ignore them. Because why would a king ignore advisors giving him advice in his own interest? Why would he act against his own interest? Because he's an idiot. Because he's prideful. Because maybe he wants his career to do other things that are implausible. That specific Season 1 scene comes to mind straight from the books, where Ned finds out things aren't going great. We're $6 million in debt, which is staggering in their currency. The realm is heavily in debt. The economy actually isn't good. We have beggared the realm. And he just stands back and goes, the hand of the king before him who died, John Arryn, he goes, I refuse to believe that John Arryn allowed this to happen. That John Arryn wouldn't have spoken out with good advice. And Pycelle goes to him, well, John Arryn frequently gave wise and sage advice, but Robert just didn't listen to him. That you have advisors who are supposed to... You could have coasted along as a figurehead. And let delegate, and that's not even coasting along. Arguably, leadership is about delegating to people who know things more than you. And he wouldn't listen to his own advisors who knew more than him. And that's a big part of the books, about when you have someone who doesn't listen to their advisors, but then you have a weak king who listens to his advisors too much, and the push and pull of that. Major thing of the books. That's what leadership is. And it's mind-blowing to people, but it happened all over the place, according to Maureen Ryan, that they were meant to be a figurehead, then we gave them absolute power, and at best there's advisors who they are free to ignore. Point of this is the people who desperately want to get a good Netflix 3 Body Problem adaptation keep insisting, I've seen this phrase over and over again the past week, well, they're good at adapting source material. Point one, up until they voluntarily abandon it, and point two, no, even before they abandoned it, they were incompetent figureheads. Things we found out from, Hibbard's book, Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, of, stunt accidents that were routinely happening, of logistical planning failures, which they'd later joke about, of, we have no idea what the logistics of filming on a glacier were, we made all sorts of mistakes. Things going back to the pilot. All of this goes back to the pilot. I have a series on this in my channel, try to link to it, that when we actually got our hands on the scripts for the unaired pilot and for Season 1 things, everything in the failed pilot came up again later in Season 8. They learned nothing. That argument, well, they're learning. They don't understand, and these are specific criticisms of specific learned skills, that they don't understand how basic screenwriting works. They would put vital exposition in the script notes, because they're novelists, and then expect the actors to just convey it with their faces. They did it in the pilot, they did it throughout the show into Season 8. Got worse Season 5 onwards, because I guess they stopped listening to the people who told them not to do that. And on top of this, for them it's a vanity project, even if they were trying to do a good job. Their idea is it's a vanity project meant to pander the lead actors making emotional performances. So it ends up being a bunch of tight close-ups on the lead actors' faces with no dialogue. In the pilot. And the lighting issues, where they would film in total darkness, they describe what the original Daenerys wedding scene looked like. It was filmed outside at night, backlit by fires. You couldn't see a damn thing. And when you could see anything, it was a tight close-up on the actor's face. With no dialogue. And they're like, why did we pay millions of dollars to film on location in Morocco for this? Not my opinion. Head of HBO drama told them this. You have no idea how basic cinematography works. that you don't film at night. These are season 8 things, that it's just the brooding faces. Well, they thought, well, I'm a novelist. I can write what a character is thinking. You can't convey that on TV. You have to convey it in dialogue. That is what the art of screenwriting is. You can't convey exposition through faces, and they try to do that. Like, they forgot to mention that Jamie and Cersei are brother and sister in dialogue, but did in the script notes. So yes, all evidence is that after the failed pilot, HBO was covering for them as figureheads in the first 4 seasons. They weren't good at adapting the source material into the failed pilot. Someone was covering for them in seasons 1 to 4. But by the middle of the show, as they got settled into power with Emmy wins, they stopped listening. Because out of ego, they'd rather be in total control than listen to advice by career experts. People telling them, no, horses can't do that kind of stunt. Or it takes a minimum of 6 weeks to train them to make a stage fall. I can't make it happen in 2 weeks. That's just how horses work. We'll find a way. No. Dangerous things like that. And so they're not isolated incidents. They're part of a consistent pattern of incompetence. That the exact manner Season 8 was filmed in, was scripted and shot in and performed, that's what they were trying to do in the pilot, and it's mind-boggling that they can't cite ignorance. They think their way is better. And I predicted this all on my channel. I started my whole crusade for this in the aftermath of Season 6, and I predicted what Season 7 would be like, and I said, stop thinking of it in story terms. Think of it, and they're going to make these scenes to show off the actors, no dialogue, tight close-ups, and felt really good when a lot of people after Season 7 came on, you predicted this so well. I said, because it's what they were doing. It just got worse. It can always get worse. And then Season 8 happened, and I made videos before Season 8 going, predicting, and they're going to randomly show off different characters. They aren't trying to tell a story that you disagree with. They don't have a different interpretation. It's a bunch of pandering scenes slapped together. And the stylistic thing, if you can call it that, is bunch of vanity shots of lead actor faces. We could tell that this type of thing would happen because people didn't want to think it could happen. So all of this culminates, this brings us to Three Body Problem, my warnings for Three Body Problem fandom. The same predictions that I made for Season 7 and 8 hold for this, in terms of the general pattern to look out for. That it's like when you're looking at one of those diagrams where you're looking at a white vase and then you see the two black faces looking at it, one of those mental things, just mentally step back and realize this isn't an in-universe thing, this is out of universe. Don't waste time debating. They have a different interpretation of Cersei. They don't have an interpretation of Cersei. They are showing off Lena Headey. They see this as not a show. They don't care about the show. They don't care about Netflix. They care about how can this further my own career by padding my resume with when an actor wins awards, it reflects on Benioff and Weiss's profile. So, point by point, point 1, they aren't trying to adapt your story. They are trying to pander lead actors for awards to boost their own careers. Point 2, because they don't know the first thing about making a TV show or even basic screenwriting, their concept of showing off the actors isn't even making like big scenery-chewing scenes, but relying on the actors' nonverbal emoting, which is slightly more subtle. It's not like if it was a big crying scene, even without dialogue, that might have tipped us off more. But it's easier to pass off because it's using the Kuleshov effect, that there's a human making a concentrating face, so people will just project their own meaning onto it. How many people were trying to read meaning into why Littlefinger is doing this in Season 7 just by looking at the actor's face, when the actor himself said, I wasn't even trying to hint anything, I don't know why my character was doing this. That you can't just read the face of an actor who doesn't know what his character is doing, because they're not real people. We are attuned to, our brains are hardwired that we read nonverbal meaning into other people's faces in our day-to-day lives. Actors aren't the characters they're supposed to be portraying. If you have a poorly written character, the actor doesn't know how to convey it, because there's nothing to convey. And this comes up in other clips I'm going to link, that, like, they would argue with Lena Headey, particularly about, like, when Tommen died. She said Cersei should be crying, that they'd micromanage everyone. They told her, no, make a concentrating face, that drama face of I'm brooding. It's a relatively neutral, concentrating face. Like, it's basically soap opera face when the soap opera is cut to commercial and have someone make a brooding face, and you project whatever meaning you want onto it. If it was specifically angry or crying, that's one thing. They're intentionally vague, and so people will project meaning onto it. And yes, point three, this extends to how they film the cinematography, showing off the tight close-ups on the lead actor faces like a beautiful poster. They even make videos showing this is literally the same camera angle and expression as they use on the posters. And the things that the HBO drama had complained about, it said in the notes of it, there's no wide shots in this. From purely a logistical standpoint, they will waste millions of dollars on sets and locations only to then ruin them with tight close-ups. And then, point four, last of these, they will rewrite the story to show off the core actors who can get them awards. We wasted so much time and effort, like I said, trying to figure out what Cersei's doing. There is no Cersei, there is only Lena Headey. There will be no reason for Arya to be doing certain things, like kill the Night King or have the street chase with the waif. It's we wanted to show off Maisie Williams as a stereotype of herself, making a concentrating face. They even invented characters and gave them more to do than book characters based on I like the actor, or rewrite a character so much that they're functionally a new one. We saw bits of that in the one preview scene they put out, that so many people saying this feels like a Benioff and Weiss thing, where it's just them with the VR helmet, if you've seen that, John Bradley is just putting the helmet on, and in a 2-minute clip, he says the F word how many times, and people, and this feels like Benioff. You have to understand, not to go into detail, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not going to try and analyze him anymore, but Benioff is basically like one of the Roy children from Succession. He's this frightened man-child, and he thinks that cursing makes him seem tough. That he's overcompensating, so he curses constantly. That the scripts for Game of Thrones were filled with cursing, even in the script notes, to the point, not just me, other people remarking, this is jarring how much he curses. And when we've seen other interviews, the unscripted interviews and stuff, he curses a lot in just everyday life. That's just the register of his speaking. It's how he is, and he doesn't even mean it, like, offensively. It's just, he thinks it makes him sound cool, and he works it into the register of the way he talks a lot. Overcompensating. He's this wiener. He said, I was the runt of the family. I was this tiny, nerdy kid. He's trying to overcompensate. So that's another prediction, is there's going to be a ton of cursing in it. And, like, when they did finally not have book dialogue to steal or abandon, how by the later season 7 and 8, it's not as beautiful as Martin's words, it's a bunch of dick jokes and ball jokes and eunuch jokes. That he's trying to be crass to show off how tough he is. Either F words or crass sex jokes, he's overcompensating. So apart from there'll be a ton of cursing in this, that's just a stylistic thing, that's how he talks. In that clip, over Twitter and stuff, I pointed out, look how many shots of this are needlessly tight close-ups of John Bradley's face. And even when they should be panning around to show how big the VR world is with wide shots, instead they're making close-ups of John Bradley's face to play off of his nonverbal reaction to being in a VR world. In which case, why did you bother making the VR world? So, just in the few clips we've seen of this, you can see the stylistic hallmarks of how he handled and ruined Game of Thrones. It's not about showing off the VR world that the Trisolarans made. It's about showing off John Bradley for Emmy Awards. Which ties in with, case in point, actors who returned from Game of Thrones. I already mentioned John Bradley. Jonathan Pryce is in this. The High Sparrow. They cast him as that billionaire guy who's allied with ETO, with the ship. They stunt cast him in Three Body Problem, much as they stunt cast Jonathan Pryce in Game of Thrones. They wanted the prestige of having Jonathan Pryce in their show, regardless of whether he was suited to it or not. Now, actually, I think he would have been a good High Sparrow in a book-faithful adaptation. But they'd invent scenes in, like, Season 6, which you forget, because they were forgettable, of just, and here's another, I want John Bradley on screen as much as possible to show that I have him. Like, a similar thing was, like, Mark Gatiss as Tycho Nestoris, and he wasn't playing or even attempting to portray Book Tycho in any personality or anything. It was Mark Gatiss stunt cast as Mark Gatiss for the prestige of, that feather in my cap that I got Mark Gatiss in my show. Famous people or Ed Sheeran or whoever, just they're showing off. I got this person. Well, that's more of a they were goofing off with that, but they stunt cast Jonathan Pryce to show off we have Jonathan Pryce playing himself. Key thing I'm going to link in the description box. One of the Blu-ray commentary clips I have happens to include a scene with Pryce. One of the major scenes I point to happens to include Jonathan Pryce, who is now in Three Body Problem, where it's the season 5 finale Blu-ray commentary. It's the scene where the High Sparrow is meeting with Cersei in the dungeon, and Benioff is just gushing in the commentary. This scene is perfect. There's no dialogue, no camera motion, just Lena and Jonathan. Wow, these faces are amazing. Pretty much encapsulates the whole show, so I'm going to link that. Part of this is just them showing off. Part of this is that Benioff isn't that much different from the kind of celebrity hype fans who enjoy when their favorite actors strike a pose, even though that isn't real acting. I mean, by example, if Breaking Bad. If Breaking Bad fans at a convention kept pestering Bryan Cranston, say, I am the one who knocks, and he tried to patiently tell them that this wouldn't be the same as when he did it on screen, because he has to get into that mental state as an actor to be truly acting, and on top of that, it's removed from its context with the other actors, with the sets, with the cinematography, music, and pacing, that you can't just have him say it as a catchphrase, not, like as a joke on SNL or something, but it isn't the same that you just came here for the memes, That when you have hype fans, they are the ones who turned Jon Snow into a meme saying, I don't want it and you're McQueen. They are the ones that wanted him saying empty memes and acting as a stereotype of himself, and they're surprised when Season 8 delivered. They just want the actors to strike poses. Maisie Williams was playing a stereotype of herself from Season 5 onwards, probably before that. John Bradley, meanwhile, is a complete sellout, who owes there are videos of him in interviews crying and sobbing that I owe my career to Benioff and Weiss. I am nothing without them. They raised me up. Not too surprised he's one of the ones that sold out for this, that he knows who feeds him. So, point is, mark my words, it's not a matter of condensation for the needs of adaptation. They will invent entirely new characters just to show off actors they like. They will invent entire subplots to the point it's a TV series within a TV series that's about these entirely new characters. It is not meant to be reflecting something that happened in the books at all. It's, while I'm here, I really wanted to show off that actor I liked, so I'll pound a square peg into a round hole to show them off, to boost their own prestige. And even then, not understanding that a bunch of nonverbal emoting can't do that. Now, Game of Thrones, obviously, seasons 5 through 8 were coasting along in the success of seasons 1 through 4, where they were having a story from the book. I don't know if that'll necessarily work on a new show. You can have Maisie Williams acting as a stereotype of Arya from the first 4 seasons. You can have Jon in season 5 acting as a stereotype of Jon from the first 4 seasons. This is the first new season of Three Body Problem. The pandering with the staring faces only works if you're already attached to them. So I don't know if that'll work for Jonathan Pryce or John Bradley in this, showing them off in that manner. Oh, and as a side note, be on the lookout for this if you're a Three Body Problem fan. I don't know if you'll necessarily do this, and it's silly, but and it's not related to the core stuff. Benioff tends to write himself into his own stories, either out of vanity or at best because he's just not very imaginative. When I review Three Body Problem, the series, I will point this out. I've been watching the Chinese version because it's on PBS now, and I've read the books and everything, but I mean, I'm not that into it, I'm aware of it. But I'm going to watch it on Netflix to point it out if I see it, the stylistic things, that There were points in Game of Thrones where we wondered, why are they changing Jaime's backstory with Tywin to be things that weren't in the books? And only later did I notice this is surprisingly similar to how Benioff describes his own childhood. Maybe, and I mean, acknowledge I used to be mad about this, maybe that was just some genuine attempt he made, foolishly, to make the character more relatable, because, well, you write what you know about problems he had, and it's just, this is line for line something you said about your childhood in an interview. Maybe it wasn't vanity, maybe just, well, I write what I know, I thought it made him more sympathetic. Okay, maybe he genuinely meant that. But Benioff will either, if nothing else, he'll change the story to just show off actors to boost his career with Emmy wins. Other times he just writes things he likes. And I have no idea, this is, I made a video a while ago, I took it down because it was a little too amateurish, but I called it Benioff Thinks Brown Women Are Hot. That I sat down and read all of his books, 2 books and 1 collection of short stories of 8 stories. And a pattern I noticed is he tends to sexually fetishize non-white women. And it's a strong enough pattern that a decent number of other channels and people agreed with what he's doing here is kind of weird. The whole point was just I looked like, wow, he really hypersexualized the Sand Snakes and Dornish women as like a B-movie level thing. Is that a pattern in his writing? And yeah, it is, when I went and checked. And I have no idea why. I'm not going to psychoanalyze this. I have no idea why he does this. Just observationally, in his prior works, he tends to do that. And what I noticed was, he doesn't do it with non-white women as a whole, because he doesn't do it with black women. Even though in the Game of Thrones books, Summer Islanders are African black, but very sex positive and believe in free love. So like Chitaya, the brothel owner in the book, is a Summer Islander woman, and some of her girls are in the brothel. They cut them from the book when you think like this infamous I love tits and dragons guy, Benioff would be all over that, including Summer Islander women. So it struck me as odd. Though what I saw when I read through all of his things all at once in one sitting is, the female leads tend to be exotic. And at first I thought it was, they're Latina. But then there was this point where, in his short stories, it was when the nines roll over, where this guy, who's obviously an author insert for him, is chasing after this band leader, singer lady, and saying, she's so hot and exotic because I can't tell, is she Thai, is she Burmese? The mystery is so alluring. That the exoticism of this, that he thinks that, like some people are into redheads. That's one thing. It could have been redheads, it could have been anything else, I don't know why. Just for him, a repeated thing in many of his works is he tends to fetishize exotic, mysterious women, and what adds to the mystery is if they're a little ambiguous, like, is this Asian woman vaguely Filipino, vaguely Japanese? What matters is it's not white, it's not black, it's that intermediate thing of the spectrum of what TV Tropes calls ambiguously brown, ranging from like Burmese to Latina or something. But he's done that too with Asian women. So what excites him is the mystery. Is there a mysterious non-white, ethnically ambiguous woman in Three Body Problem based on the trailers? I think this is a prediction. I think he's going to play up and hypersexualize the Sophon. It was in the trailer, the clip, the lady who slashes John Bradley with a katana. Long story short, the video game made by human collaborators is a way to contact the aliens, the Trisolarans. Well, not directly, but the Trisolaran aliens have an AI avatar in the virtual reality game, who is actually the Sophon, the supercomputer the size of a proton who's messing up all their experiments. And she does speak for the aliens, but she's an AI. She is from the book, and I've seen people remarking on, this is their version of the Sophon. I think they are going to really play her up as some kind of sexy femme fatale, because that kind of thing really appeals to Benioff. Now, maybe it'll be within the realm of, every TV show needs some sex appeal, that's how you sell things. Just, that was a thing we noticed that he could not control himself with. Like what he did to the Sand Snakes and to Ilaria, and just, he can't help himself but do that. But that's a quirk of his, rather than the mainstream pattern of he's not trying to adapt your show, he is trying to make Red flags, alarm bells should be going off when you see we're in the VR, in the clip, we're in the VR world, but rather than wide shots showing off how big it is, it's playing off of tight close-ups on the lead actor's face. And then they'll invent scenes with Bradley and Jonathan Pryce, non-verbally, tight close-ups, just emoting, which is not cinematography, not acting, and not writing. That's just how he's trying to cynically further his career with pandering. So, incompetent figureheads, and as I said before, yes, they will continue to keep failing upward. I know you're reacting with disbelief, but for most of you, you can see the reality on the ground. They are in charge of a $200 million flagship show at Netflix. And you might be reacting with disbelief when you see me once or twice in Twitter or YouTube comments. We are about to get a huge wave of trailers and promotional blitz for this for the next 3 months. And even though there's people still in denial about all of this, you got the three body problem people saying, well, no, they ran out of source material. They didn't. Even when they were following it, they'd make bizarre changes to it in the first 4 seasons, and then they voluntarily abandoned it. You've even seen in the teaser that they're inventing characters. They're inventing characters to show off actors they like, not to reflect things from your book. And everyone else with... This is really happening. Nothing changed. We needed to have accountability for Game of Thrones, to have news exposés, much in the way they brought down Joss Whedon, saying, in retrospect, season 5 through 8 are all connected. Stylistically, this is the same mistake over and over again. And if the Access journalism hype news ignored all these problems, well, then we need to be eternally vigilant. We need to be the watchmen, guarding against this kind of thing and informing people and telling them this is what is really happening, not just leaving everyone in ignorance. Well, this started out as a specific warning about what to expect at their press panel tomorrow. I've been rambling about the back and forth of how they ruined this, but in terms of specific concrete warnings I have about that, tomorrow is when they launch the meta show, the promotional campaign for Benioff and Weiss running 3 Body Problem, coming in less than 3 months. That is when that will start, and my only thing is things will get weird. And I can't say more than that. Just one way or another, it will get as weird as the alternate reality distortion field we were living in from seasons 5 through 8. Where the news was not reflecting reality because it's just hype news. The key issue is that Netflix already paid for them and want to get their money's worth. Why do studios put out bad movies? Because they want to make back at least some of their investment. Netflix already paid $200 million for these morons, so they can't afford not to promote them as creative geniuses. Any more than HBO did, that we have to keep promoting them to get our money's worth out of this. And Netflix will use every news outlet at their disposal. Everyone who's loyal to them. And because Access journalism, it's like that whole thing from that The Big Short movie, where the lady is justifying why they gave subprime mortgages, and she says, well, there's 5 major approval companies, and if we didn't, one of the other 4 would. Simple as that. That what if Variety or Deadline refused to give a puff piece article interview saying how great Benioff and Weiss are and they're turning it around with 3 Body Problem, then Netflix will simply move on to another entertainment magazine like GQ or Vanity Fair. And entertainment reporting is big business. There's something like 50 major recapper sites, recapper style, but even big news outlets, they will keep moving down from one to the next. All they need is one big interview with mainstream news sites and magazines. A puff piece, 10-page thing about the road to 3 Body Problem and how great we are, and gaslighting us on the problems with Game of Thrones weren't their fault. Ignoring, like, controversies that began in season 5, that they went off book and stuff. And this will get weird. And it will be just the gaslighting we experienced. And it will happen because they will move down the list until they find someone willing to make those puff pieces. They Even HBO didn't want to give Benioff and Weiss a second chance after the failed pilot, but because of the sunk cost fallacy, they had to. Netflix will do the same. As Benioff himself has boasted, like, he couldn't think of a reason for them to go, oh, well, the failed pilot wasn't my fault. That he was trapped like a rat and just in the office, he says, the most rattled I ever was, that he couldn't talk his way out of, you have no idea how cinematography works. You have no idea how filming works, or screenwriting, because there's, like, exposition in the script notes, and we didn't know Jamie and Cersei were brother and sister when you screened it to people. And he for once dropped the mask and just said, I have no excuse, but you've already got $10 million in advanced foreign pre-sales on this. It is the most expensive pilot in history. And if you want to make back a fraction of that money, you will give me another chance, because you can't afford not to, financially. We are too big to fail. He exploits the sunk cost fallacy regularly. Similarly, Netflix already sank $200 million simply on the contract to hire Benioff and Weiss, much less the cost of the company. This thing is rivaling Lord of the Rings of Power in terms of budget. Well, a $200 million price tag for what should have been a multi-series deal, and in addition to that, all the production costs of a major flagship show. We're probably never even going to know the full number. They won't share it with us, but they need this to be their next big flagship, and they are desperate for that, because a lot of their other flagship shows are ending or winding down or losing popularity. The Witcher came and went. On the awards front, their big shows, The Crown and Ozark, wrapped up. And I guess comparable might be Stranger Things, which is a popular show but occasionally gets awards. I'm not really sure if they were aiming for more of the awards prestige or widespread popularity, or maybe a crossover show that gets both in the style of Lord of the Rings, but it isn't that kind of show. I mean, it should be an awards type thing, but it's a hard sci-fi novel in the style of Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It has more in common with, like, Apple TV's Foundation adaptation, which had to change things, and is halfway decent for appealing to the award circuit highbrow. This is for the sci-fi, the hard science fans, but this does not have relatable characters. It isn't that kind of drama show, and they want this to be their new awards bait, or even have widespread popularity in the style of Stranger Things. This was a bad choice to begin with. It is a popular book, but sometimes you have a hard sci-fi book that doesn't translate. Like Dune is a story, it has characters, it translates well to screen. This doesn't. And they bet the farm on it. And there is a Chinese version of this show, which is it's decent, I'm checking it out, but that you really thought this was the next Stranger Things. And no one was willing to contradict the internal narrative among the executives that this is actually a bad choice, and they just kept doubling down on the money, double down on this decision, rather than admit it's kind of silly. They picked it because it was popular, not questioning, would this make a good TV show when you shift formats like that would be the popular kind of show that we need. So they did this out of desperation, much as HBO hired them in 2007, somewhat out of desperation because the target on their back that they had, the head of HBO in 2007 resigned in scandal, and the new one hastily greenlit them because they needed a hit and they needed it yesterday. Because at the same time, Breaking Bad and then Mad Men were starting up at AMC. They needed a hit fast, and you see that pattern changing, that companies that have the luxury of picking and choosing, like Disney, told them to screw off. Netflix is kind of in a desperate state now with their... financially, they're okay, but in terms of their content they're producing, a lot of stuff is wrapping up. So this is supposed to be their big new flagship, and it's kind of weird, and again, maybe it was simply due to the strike, that they haven't been advertising a show this expensive that is going to be released in 3 months. So either this is them, there's no such thing as quietly dropping it, that you sunk too much money in, they can't afford not to promote it. Get ready for, in the next 3 months, compressed, because the strike, they didn't know when it would come out, so they didn't lead up to it gradually with teasers over 6 months or a full year. Get ready for 3 months of bizarre, insulting, gaslighting promotional tour in which Netflix will find news outlets to go through pre-scripted interviews with cringeworthy scripted comments praising what geniuses Benioff and Weiss are. And it'll be just like when so many other shamed producers on other things took a couple of years off after a failed project or a personal scandal, came back, like in Maureen Ryan's book, and just wouldn't address the elephant in the room. And this already happened. This isn't a hypothetical. Remember how weird it was in the aftermath of season 5? Really get back into that mental state when they made this huge and controversial, and people, oh, you keep bringing up the Sansa rape. This, I like the Atlantic was one of the few big publications calling them out on this stuff, said the invented sexual violence and throwing out character arcs to do rape stuff was the defining failure of this so-called adaptation. Oh, what else would we talk about? There is no other news. This was the lightning rod controversial thing they did. That was not just it's a change. This is insulting. And that, well, we already paid for them. We can't criticize them. Let's keep pretending they're geniuses. But after I can't think of something hypothetically more offensive than that as, oh yeah, we threw out Wonder Woman's storyline to have her raped by the Joker. It wasn't just for shock value. They wanted Sophie Turner to win an Emmy Award. And thought such a meaty role would have been lost on someone else. And they say that in the commentary. We did this to show off these performances and these faces. That's why we had Sansa marry Ramsay. And the news media glossed over that and didn't report on the Blu-rays. But in the immediate aftermath of season 5, that this isn't just a little bickering about, oh, Rob's girlfriend is a little different. This is a massive change. Care to talk about that? And I kept thinking naively, in the aftermath of season 5, how the hell are they going to talk about this in the post-season interviews? How naively I didn't realize that those are totally scripted, have always been scripted. They didn't talk about season 1 was a nightmare behind the scenes. They didn't talk about it. That they passed it off. So it's just that to a bigger extreme. And just tell me in the comments, please back me up on this. I really need you to. Remember that feeling of they do these pre-scripted interviews asking soft questions and deflect to other things rather than talk about the elephant in the room. And okay, well, I'm not in that storyline if they're asking Emilia Clarke or something, but Sophie Turner herself, how would you talk about this in interviews? And some of these interviewers, I got the sense that it's not that they were told not to ask her, it's they were terrified to ask her, rather than be seen as insulting. Not just for a career standpoint, they would nudge, sex assault is pretty controversial, and it's like, not just that it seemed like they were worried about hurting her feelings, when the show already did that. And then, of course, season 8, they doubled down with the rape made me stronger thing. Where do you think that came from? It came from season 5. It didn't go away, much as you pretend it didn't. But just remember that I honestly thought, after season 5 finale, credits rolling, how would they even get away with this in the post-season interviews? And then they did. Because everyone that's in bed with this, access journalism, even the ones not directly working for them, were afraid of rocking the boat. They'd ask softball questions. In other cases, you had pre-scripted, not interviews. Well, it's an upfront presentation, is not reporter Q&A. They are screened. You saw what happened at the final San Diego Comic-Con. They skipped Comic-Con for season 5, Benioff and Weiss. It's simple as that. And faced no criticism, to the point that many people forgot that they skipped Comic-Con in season 5, which is this high honor, and were shocked when they didn't come for season 8. And I wasn't shocked, like they didn't come for season 5. I was surprised they scheduled it, then canceled at the last minute. Either they were that indecisive, or they were lying just to avoid people yelling at them. I have no idea. That postponed, saying we're not going as long as possible. We'll never know. But unrelated, that you'd still see like late night talk shows having guest spots with the cast and funny comedy bits. They did that comedy bit on Jimmy Kimmel, I think, actually, if the hold the door thing in season 6, and they just stopped talking about that controversy. And well, no one spoke up when they did that, and now suddenly they're killing Missandei and Daenerys turning evil, random shit that's or the total darkness of the, and even if it wasn't dark, the battle was gibberish because they're the ones that wrote it for once. They insisted, no, we know how to make a battle scene, you don't, because it's just showing off Maisie. All of that stems from season 5, but I really thought, how can they get through this? And you saw them one thing at a time. They didn't give an interview for a year after things like that happened, and then they just dance around it. They'd wait for things to cool off, and then they were stunned or angry when people, after season 6, there was an interview at a writer's conference, and it didn't gain enough traction because people were afraid to show them being angry when people asked about that. Just how can they possibly... I know how absurd it sounds, and to an extent, okay, why would they talk about Game of Thrones on a thing about three-body problem? Even, they will have fluff answers even about three-body problem. It's politician speak. Where they talk, it was so wonderful working with everyone, it was a wonderful experience. Can you care to tell me specifics about how you intend to adapt this? Or certain specific choices of why you invented certain characters, or why it's making little changes to the story? If he knows, it's called a cocktail personality. Benioff knows how to talk in a 10-minute burst at a shallow level and act charming. But if you simply engage him in a slightly deeper than surface level discussion about the technical aspects of screenwriting, storytelling, or filmmaking, he will start giving bizarre responses or desperately try to deflect to other people. And what's weird is, even now, I don't know if Benioff himself realizes how bad it was. How bad the backlash was. The last we really heard from them in detail was the Season 8 commentaries, where we could tell, because they referred to Chernobyl, it was recorded about a month after the finale, and it really hadn't sunk in for them yet just how bad the backlash was, that even through the Emmy Awards by September 2019... they would brush it off as, people didn't like the Sopranos ending, and it wasn't just the ending, it's, we were giving these later seasons since season 5 a pass because we thought it would be worth it, and it wasn't, you strung us along. And it isn't just, Sopranos ends abruptly because life goes on. This is character assassination of the worst kind, and it's sloppy, and you were blatantly rushing to launch a movie career. And I don't know how much they internalize. Even I still don't, because I know they a little more than they let on. But I think it's because the whole thing of when you want to believe something to be true, that they wanted to think this was just Sopranos level backlash. I think the cast obviously knew otherwise. The cast knew just how bad it was, but almost as a science experiment, divorced from our anger over this, it's almost fascinating just how much of a bubble someone can be in like that, like at Fyre Fest, or with the Elizabeth Holmes scandal, of the person in the middle genuinely might not know how bad it is, because they live in a dreamed world, surrounded by yes men in a bubble. So, does Benioff really check, the mainstream news outlets to see not what we the fans, but just know I don't think they really believe, because they don't want to believe, that the anger stuck, that people were still traumatized at how bad this was, that 3 years later there were open, deep worries about trying to launch a prequel spin-off. I remember so many reviewers said, I'm going to hate watch the first episode, then stopped and saw it and went, wow, this is very good compared to what Game of Thrones was. Maybe these new writers, we should give them a chance, and stuck through it and really liked it. Like Angry Joe, Quinn's Ideas openly said that we were totally against this even 3 years later. It wasn't just, there's always a little bickering after a finale. And in retrospect, all the other stuff that came out, that it wasn't just season 8. And the Austin Film Fest stuff taunting we didn't know what we were doing. So on the one hand, memories can be short. On the other hand, they can be surprisingly long. The attitudes did settle. The thing is, at best, they are forgotten. No one is going to suddenly... Totally. Either people said, I'm angry, then they don't think about it. But what they want, that the anger will blow over and people will remember the good times. No. Just because we ran out of things to complain, it doesn't mean we're that, oh no, I'm going to come back and everyone's going to welcome us with rose petals, That, do they really think this is going to be a triumphant return where people are happy to see them? And they surround themselves with so many yes men. What is their conception of reality? It's sort of like a thing, I think Martin knew people like this, that narcissistic type who, like Cersei in Book 4, when you see chapters from her POV where she is so convinced how smart she is when she does really stupid things, because she surrounds herself with yes men. That, sorry, all this is just part of this is a question, not an answer. How are they going to behave when they have to do the press circuit on this? Do they know obviously they're going to deflect questions from it because it'll be uncomfortable, but does part of them want people to be praising them for Game of Thrones and convinced it blew over? I'm pretty sure they'll at least deflect it so nothing goes wrong, or they'll be asked pre-scripted questions. It's not going to be some Perry Mason moment where they go, oh, well, things happen, just you're a fraud. This isn't normal, oh, well, the project went a little weird with a movie series that took a different turn. It's behind-the-scenes revelations that you didn't know what you were doing and are deeply incompetent. So with the echo chamber and everything, how much do they know? All I know is things are going to be weird, and it'll be that surreal experience of when they gave gaslighting interviews all over again. And if you think that won't happen, Netflix needs it to happen, and they will find lackeys who will toe the party line. So, my final warning with specific regard to tomorrow's panel, if and when we get reports out of it, I don't know if there'll be video reports or not, is that allegedly this was co-produced with True Blood's Alexander Wu, and Star Wars' Rian Johnson was attached, but I think that was just like a money thing as a producer. Alexander Wu will be at the panel, though. Johnson will not. If you have any hope that Alexander Wu will save the show while Benioff and Weiss are just figureheads, imagine how weird it is how many alleged showrunners are on this show with the amorphous title of producer. They made it pretty clear Benioff and Weiss are the showrunners, but then they go, well, but Alexander Wu is handling things. Just let me guess, you thought you could make them figureheads while Wu actually makes the show. The same thing happened to Game of Thrones. And like that whole analogy with King Robert and the Small Council, they're not going to be just figureheads. Your best case scenario is that they're figureheads who do not actively contribute to making it. But the reality is they're egocentric narcissists that will ignore the direct advice of experts who know better than them out of pride. These are men who 8 seasons into their show rejected weeks-long complaints from their VFX team that the Season 8 battle was too dark to see. That wasn't something they found out when it aired. That we know from the Blu-ray commentaries. These were arguments going on for weeks. They knew you couldn't see anything, and they ignored them. And it's unfortunate that people will dismiss that out of hand as nothing this ridiculous could have really happened. Doesn't mean they didn't, because they're corrupt buffoons, not acting in their own interest. And so much of this hinges on this is implausible. Really, you've seen mistakes in Hollywood all the time. But even there's one of two scenarios. Either the show is bad out of the gate in Season 1, because they will always try to take control of anything. They will never just settle for being a figurehead. Or, at best, they stepped back like a step back after the Game of Thrones pilot, just enough to let Wu do his job on Season 1. But then after Season 1 is a hit, much as Game of Thrones' later seasons, they started seizing control and micromanaging it, that it's my show, damn it. They will then squeeze Wu out of control internally with various internal fights and start doing it their way. Because they want this to be known as the Benioff and Weiss show. The entire point was to hire them as the brand name from the makers of Game of Thrones. That you don't spend $200 million on it, then hide their name in the credits in small print. They wanted Game of Thrones to be the Benioff and Weiss show more than based on the works of George R. R. Martin. You think they'll stay true to Liu Zixin any more than Martin? Well, because it's finished. They abandoned the print books long before they ran out of novels. So they might keep their heads down for a while at first, but will eventually, even season 1, that they are too far gone. I don't see how they could do that. And just, it's in their nature, because we saw that this is how they did that. As for the specific events at the panel itself, assuming it isn't just utterly pre-scripted dialogue from both sides, one of their most frequent tactics when doing group interviews like at San Diego Comic-Con, Benioff and Weiss, one of their most frequent tactics is just deflect questions to the cast. Deflect questions to the cast or co-producers, no matter how shamelessly. I mean, even when a reporter would directly ask Benioff himself a hard question, he deflected to Weiss. I have that whole joke he had at Austin Film Fest where he even described, it happens in real time, audio only, but someone asks him a question and you hear the pause as he's just looking at Weiss and waiting for him to answer a question when it was asked to him by name, and just, he even has to say, well, that thing where he cynically goes, well, I've learned that if I stay quiet long enough, someone else will volunteer a question for me, which is unfortunately true. And you've seen this with your own eyes. That's what happened at that post-Emmys Q&A thing they did in 2019. Remember when directly asked about Daenerys' story, and I'm annoyed that news sites didn't call him out on this at the time. It was on video. What did you do with the Dragon Queen story? It's controversial. And Benioff started he's standing at the microphone, started looking around the stage as if looking for another person in the room to field a question which was asked of him as the head writer. Not even to Weiss, but just to other people. Looking around, not addressing the writer. It was bizarre. I still think about it. And I guess he was looking for Emilia Clarke. She literally ducked to her knees to signal, I will not answer this, as if mock hiding. And then there's this long, awkward silence until ultimately Kit Harington stood up to field it with a generic response. Not even Game of Thrones questions, specific questions about the adaptation process, real questions of substance about, okay, as a fan of Three Body Problem, the books, how is this reflecting story decisions you made? They will give rambling responses that ultimately amount to, we liked the actor, or deflect with other things. It'll either be bizarrely scripted, or another thing, when he can't deflect, like at Oxford Union. Well, usually he deflected. There was one point he was directly asked what was going on with that weird Cersei Jaime scene. He will flap his mouth rambling and giving, it's called cold reading. He'll ramble off a couple of possible, in some cases, conflicting answers, and wait for, because the questioner wants to believe him. We'll wait for, well, it was busy that day, and also, condensation reasons, and, characters are complicated. Oh, so you did it to make them more three-dimensional. That's it, I did it to make it more three-dimensional. Don't volunteer him answers, he will latch on to one of them. That's cold reading, is that he'll mumble his way through a couple of things and wait for you to pick one out. And a real interviewer go, I can tell that you're waiting for me to pick an answer, give me a straight answer. They never do. So I think in all probability this is probably just like the last San Diego Comic-Con they didn't go to, where they accidentally released 2 videos of one they did earlier in the day, and it was literally pre-rehearsed questions with James Hibbard. But this time with Benioff and Weiss, they're probably not going to talk a lot. If they do, they'll be giving pre-scripted things as part of a press release, but I'm talking about also for future interviews after this, because they paid for them. They paid for these guys to be the face of the show. They will need to send them on late-night talk show circuits. And sooner or later, something will go by accident, and someone will bring out Game of Thrones. The mind boggles, but I'm trying to make this as a warning to Three Body Problem people, and all I know for certain is things will get weird, much as they did back when they were dodging our questions on late Game of Thrones. And even if they go, let's talk Three Body Problem, ask them a serious question, they will deflect even from that. Because why do you think they got this? Because suddenly they're giant fans of Chinese science fiction literature? Or because they thought it was a high-profile book that could boost their careers? Point of all of this, the whole video, is on a meta level. Like I said at the beginning, this isn't the return of Benioff and Weiss. It's not the return of the Benioff and Weiss show Three Body Problem. This is a return of the meta Benioff and Weiss show, of the pre-scripted song and dance that they do on talk shows and in puff piece interviews, promoting how great they are. That in the next 3 months, and they have to do it hard because they missed out on a couple of months due to the strike. If the strikes didn't happen, maybe they would have had more than a 3-month lead up or something. You don't sink $200 to $300 million in a project, then not promote it with their famous showrunners. And they are going to be promoting these guys heavily. It's what they do. And it is going to be bizarre, and I can only hope that the scales have fallen from people's eyes. And during season 7 and 6 and before that, they would say bizarre things in the inside the episodes, like, oh, well, I guess we kind of forgot that the Tyrells aren't really good fighters, and no, they're Army 1 Battle of the Blackwater. Weird shit like that going back for years, but what gives me hope is people didn't settle for the reality distortion field in the inside the episodes in season 8. They actually had to yank the last one from airing, but it was on the Blu-ray. Of Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. Not just us watching, I mean, news sites reported on when he said that, because it was so outlandish. The combination of it got that absurd, and people had enough. I'm still wondering, why did people finally start reporting on Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet? He'd done stuff like that for years. But I guess the whole thing is nothing fails like failure, that they will latch on to. I don't think people are invested in seeing him succeed anymore, making excuses for him. The sunk cost fallacy, they are latching on to if he says something stupid, even if it's something relatively innocuous. That I hope they stick to. I'm actually holding my punches. I will only land on him if he says something truly bizarre. Yeah, he's the usual brush off what you expect. Only if it's something on the level of Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. Would I want to savor the worst moments so things don't don't fixate on too many little things. Let's prioritize the worst of this when it comes. That they're a brand name, they're going to start the interview circuit, and I can't imagine them not promoting this. And on top of that, this is a relative dry spell because of the pandemic. I mean, not the pandemic, I'm sorry, because of the writer's strike. Very few shows are coming out in the first half of 2024 from major platforms and studios. Marvel and Star Wars aren't really putting out too many big things. Stranger Things isn't coming out, for example. HBO Max is also not. Their bigger stuff comes out later in the year. It's going to be sort of like when Season 8 happened, and they wanted to make sure that everyone in the world saw Season 8 and heavily promoted it, which only showed off just how bad it was, and they wanted people to see the inside the episodes. They used to be on YouTube. They moved them to be at the end of the streaming right after the credits. They wanted people to see them pontificating about it, not realizing how bad that made them look. Right? So another thing is, with not many, like, mid-season premieres, like The Boys, Amazon's The Boys doesn't have a spring release, they have assured that they're not quietly dumping it against another big hit so people don't know. They wanted to make damn sure that Three Body Problem is the talked-about show the first half of 2024. And let's hope they get their wish, you know? That this won't fly under. You can't. It's supposed to be the next Stranger Things. It's not going to fly under the radar. You wanted it to be big. How do you not vet the showrunners on an over $200 million contract? So, like I said at the beginning, it's going to get really weird and downright surreal. Many of you have forgotten just how weird it was seeing these bizarre interviews from the later seasons, particularly post-Season 8, like the Emmys, all pre-scripted in this bubble of these guys are amazing. It's like something out of Amazon's The Boys, or they have the PR campaigns to make Homelander look great and get increasingly unhinged and desperate because you just can't clean this up anymore. So that's my prediction. Things are going to get weird between now and when this drops in March.